Hello and welcome to the Creativity Couch. We're your hosts and creativity agony aunts, and along with special guests, we're here to answer all your creativity challenges, conflicts and conundrums as we take a deep dive into the sweet and salty realities of creativity and living a creative life. No topic is off limits, so make yourself a cuppa and come join us on the Creativity Couch.
Hi everyone, I'm Anna. This is the Creativity Couch.
I'm Christina.
And this is Joanne Fedler, our fantastic special guest who is coming today to talk all about writing. Jo is a world-renowned author. She's sold well over 750,000 books. She's also a writing mentor, and she has a plethora of online courses and fantastic resources online, so you can access her brilliance and content from all over the world.
Thanks.
So welcome, Jo, for coming.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming in. Looking resplendent in that shirt.
I know, my goddess shirt.
Amazing.
Isn't it beautiful?
Thank you for matching our Creativity Couch set.
Wow.
And we're also sharing a cup of tea from Pukka. Thank you, Pukka. I'm drinking Womankind today, which is perfect.
I'm also drinking Womankind.
What are you
And
drinking?
I'm revitalising.
Excellent. Okay, so the Creativity Couch is all about getting questions from our community. So I'm also the founder of Mama Creatives, and
I have a business called Creative Consultancies where I do creative life and business coaching, especially for people who are working in the creative industries or wanting to, or just wanting to make their creative work centre stage.
so what we want to do is we want people to send in their letters and their creativity challenges, conflicts and conundrums. And when we have an interesting challenge, we bring in experts like Jo to come and help us dissect that question from all different perspectives. So today our question is all about writing and manuscripts and publishing. Jo also has her own publishing, she had her own publishing business, and so she knows all about that as well.
And sending a question in is as easy as this one just came in through my Facebook page. So someone put a comment up and said, "This is my question." So it's that easy. If you feel like you've got a question, it's not like you have to draft it along. Just get in touch with us and we will try and answer your question.
Before we get to the question, which is very, very soon, we want to ask Jo a little bit about what creativity means to you. The first question we ask all our guests.
Well, creativity to me is, what comes from just being an alive and an awake and a curious human being. I think creativity is about being in awe of all the opportunities that come from being a human being that can create something from nothing.
Yes.
And that comes from, for me, from a sense of curiosity, a sense of questioning, a sense of wonder about the world, and then taking that desire and wanting to transmute it into something. I mean, that to me is the human impulse, is transformation and transmutation, taking straw and spinning it into gold. And that's what we do as human beings. We do that, with our relationships. We can do that, the way you do your hair, your makeup, anything that you do in the world, the way you cook, the way you are in, the way that you manage your relationships with people, your children. It's the way that you do things. It's not, in a way, what you do. I guess it's the how that you do it, because you can cook in a way that is deeply uninspiring and uncreative, or you can do it with incredible joy, just with a simple little egg and 2 asparagus stalks. You can turn that into a feast. So for me, I guess as well, creativity is also about a sense of fullness and sensing the richness of the world that's around us.
It's like a philosophy. It's like a creative life rather than a creative act where you go and you spend 5 minutes doing something. It's the way you approach life.
Yeah, it's like a lens, that you see the world through. And I guess part of that, that sense of transformation has got to do with the belief that you have the power to make something. I mean, to make something from nothing. And, for me, anyone who has ever been fortunate enough to be pregnant and birth a child understands that it's from nothing. You create something, and anyone who's, made a mark on a wall or on a page or put a few words together that, to look at that and go, I made that. So we all have it in us. It's not a kind of a magical quality. It's
totally.
just there.
That's what makes us human.
Yeah.
It's what we do with it. So I want to ask, I know you are compelled to write and to teach others to write. I'm wondering where that started, if there's any anecdotes from childhood, and if you can sort of link the dots between wanting to be this writer? Did it start from a young age?
Well, I am the second of two girls. My older sister was born deaf, and so for the first couple of years she couldn't speak, and my parents actually didn't know what was wrong with her. And then when I came along, apparently I'm told that I started speaking very early, around 9 months, and I was my sister's interpreter. My parents couldn't understand what she was saying before she had speech and hearing therapy, before they actually even knew that she had a hearing impairment. And I understood her, and so I think I've always understood the power of language, to be seen or be heard or understood in the world. And I guess a lot of my life's energy has been helping people sort of use their language to be seen, to cross a bridge, to be understood. The theme of everything I teach is about finding your voice.
Yep. Wow.
And so for me it's literally about communicating. But when I was about 14 and my dad looked at me on another diet, and he said, "My darling, why are you doing that?" He said, "Look at you, you're not going to be a model, look at the nose and the big thighs." He said, "Forget about that." He said,
"My parents great. I had a very similar, wanted to be an actor and got told, forget about it, you're just too weird looking. With your one eyebrow." I've got two now.
It was meant in a very loving way. I feel like it was like, I guess, the first sort of feminist moment of my life, where he was like, "You'll be other things." He says, "You have so many gifts," and he said to me, and then he gave me a copy of Dylan Thomas's book, Under Milkwood.
Oh, how good was that?
And I read this book, and when I read this, I thought to myself, I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to take language and do that with it. So I think that's where the excitement about language, it wasn't such a functional thing of communicating it, then it became this beautiful thing that you could make people feel things with. And
you can export them to another world.
Yeah.
That's how I felt with visual arts. I used to do that with drawing and painting and pastels.
I admire that. My father's an artist, so I grew up in that very sort of creative environment, and he could just he could just draw something, and you would be transported to another world from nothing, from its blank piece of page, and and then suddenly there was this magical world in front of your eyes that I had just watched him create, and I always admired that.
One of my brothers is a musician, and he would just hear something once and play it back on his guitar, and sound just
that's a particular.
It is.
That's a particular skill.
Back in the 70s, he got me into bread, and actually. A whole lot of amazing music, and he would just play it, and I said, "How can you do that?" And he would say to me, like you just said, "How can you draw that?" So
it's so beautiful. It's amazing.
It reveals itself in different ways.
Absolutely.
Right? So getting back to the question, having written 10 books, on to your 10th book.
I'm on my 11th.
11th book.
I'm finishing my 11th.
Jeff,
11th book.
Fact or fiction? Is that, where do you write in?
I actually have written across all the genres. Yeah, I've written a couple of books of fiction, a couple of books of non-fiction, self-help. So at the moment I'm writing one that sort of would be called a kind of a narrative non-fiction. Yep. So it reads like fiction, but it's based on a lot of real conversations.
Can't wait for that one. It's going to be good. I know a little bit about it.
Yeah, no, it's coming on well at the moment. I've had some dark days, but I've worked my way through it.
See that? Dark days. Even someone who's on their 11th book.
Oh, God, absolutely.
It's tough. It's hard. And do you find it lonely? Or do you like that solitude? Do you write by yourself, or do you need to... I have a friend who writes, and he likes to go to a cafe with all the sounds. I personally like to be quiet and not be distracted. How do you write?
It just really depends on how I feel on any given day. I think sometimes I feel a little bit cabin fevered in my own space, and also I get quite overwhelmed by my own clutter, and I have to sometimes be somewhere where there's nothing. And then I like to go to a cafe, but then I'll sit with earphones to block out the noise. But it's nice to have that sort of sense of other people around you and
engaging in the world.
Be able to order a really good coffee.
I'm a cafe.
I like to write in a cafe.
I like to finish a project and be on my own, and then I'll go to the supermarket and feel I'm back in the world, or I'll go and walk on the street and and I'll do something really menial, and just see normal people going, "Oh, is this what's happening?" I'll feel a little bit odd, but I'll be around lots of people, and that's sort of just something like that. So, shall we read the question?
Sure.
This is the question here.
Okay.
Get your first thoughts on it.
So, question from the community is, I'm a writer. I love the rush of creating the first draft, although I'm a careful craft person. I tend to shoot myself in the foot by getting impatient with the final draft, sending it off before it's ready. do other creatives share this tendency?
What are your thoughts on that, Expert Joe?
Well, look, I think what's really important about writing is that there is a way in which, as I'm sure maybe with visual arts as well, there's a way in which something can never be done. And that you've got to really strike a balance between knowing when something is ripe, when something has found its shape, and if you haven't, for example, yet found the voice of the piece, if you haven't actually mastered the craft of what you're doing, if you haven't found what the thing is doing, it's never ever going to be ready to be sent out. And so for me, that question is really about, is this thing working? And the only way you will know if a piece of writing is working, is if you have got the writing voice, if you've got your writing voice. And so, I mean, this is really what I focus when I teach people, is how do you find your writing voice? It's not something that I could, I can spend a week trying to teach people how to do this. It's a combination of craft, the working in of your own felt and lived experience into whatever it is you're writing about. It's about depth. It's about working beyond a certain kind of cliche. Because if something is working in a kind of a cliched way, it is never ready to show someone else. It's always working in a way that is not particular to yourself. And your voice is always unique to yourself. So you have to go into your felt and lived experience, your own emotional depth, your own kind of memory pool, and then to do that sort of artistic thing, which is to then make meaning of the whole thing, so that the whole thing then crosses over between your personal experience and other people's experience. So there's a whole kind of thing that has to go into, is this piece ready? Is it finished? And finishing something is is both a kind of an emotional and it's also a very intellectual thing as well, because at a certain point with a piece, when you're sick of it, it's not ready. It's not ready for anything. The fire of it still has to be there for the piece to be working. And so you've got to know where you are in the season of something. There's always a beginning energy. There's always a middle energy, which is about kind of like a kind of conscientiousness of working through something. And then there's a kind of a commitment to finishing the piece with the same energy with which you began it. And so if you're sick of something, it's never the right time to send it off. If it's not working properly as a piece of writing, it's not ready to be sent off. And so you have to employ other people.
I was going to ask, how do you have that own self-perception? Because you can get so close to your own work that you can no longer see it. And that can go in either ways, which is like you can be in your own head and think you're a freaking genius, or like everything you're doing is awful. So how do you pick who that person is? Does it need to be a writer, or can it just be the someone you've written the book for? Like, who do you pick?
It must be a professional person. Right. It must be somebody who is going to give you feedback on whether the writing is working, not a friend, not a lover, not a sister, not someone who cares about your feelings. Because you need an objective eye to give you feedback on what is and is not working. And even before an editor, you can get you can get a manuscript assessor who will read it and give you some feedback about what is working and what is not working. Because as you say, when you're too close inside something, you can't see it anymore. But it's a little bit like self-awareness. It's like, how do you know when you're in how to be with somebody? How do you know whether to go on another date with somebody? How do you know when a relationship is over? There's a way, how do you know when it's time to apologize to somebody? There's a way in which you've got to be able to make that judgment about yourself, and that comes from self-awareness. You need some self-awareness. And self-awareness always comes in relationship with somebody else. It's not something you can just do on your own. You always need feedback from other people, because we have blind spots, because sometimes we can't see ourselves, because sometimes, we're all working with lots of layers of subconscious material. And in creativity, all our stuff comes up, all our self-doubt and all our grandiosity, all the things you can't trust. There is a way in which...
fear.
And of course, fear and of not being good enough and everything. So I find that when I mentor people, most of what I'm doing is giving them the conviction that what they're doing is good enough. And when people have got that what they're doing is good enough and they're robust enough, they need some robust feedback about how to make what they're doing better art. It's, because if what people are aiming for is just a therapeutic kind of, I'm just writing this thing for myself, that's fine. But the minute you're sending it out into the world, it's got to do this thing that I call crossing the bridge from the personal to the universal. And you've got to be able to make that, you've got to be able to cross that divide. It's not about you. Writing is never about you.
But are you talking about like a memoir or a personal account? Or are you talking about a novel? Because a novel is different characters. And I know you put yourself into those characters, but do you think the process is different depending on the type of book or...
I don't know. I mean, I've written memoir, lots of memoir type pieces. I've written lots of fiction, and I think the sense of vulnerability in memoir is heightened. But, whether a memoir works as a piece of writing or as a piece of art or as a piece of creativity is in a way the same as the question you would ask about a piece of fiction, because you've got to have strong characterization, you've got to have a good story arc, you've got to have all the things you need: symbolism, setting, theme. The writing has got to work. It mustn't be sentimental, overdrawn. All the things that I would give feedback on if I was looking at a piece of writing. And so it's so important to have somebody whose opinion that you value and trust, somebody who understands writing, to give you some feedback, to say, look, I mean, I've just been doing some feedback for some of the writers that I mentor, and I can see what some of the writers are doing.
Got our studio cat.
Oh, that is brilliant.
Come on the couch. She wants in on the action. Oh, isn't she so good? I know. On the couch.
No.
Not on the couch. Be gone.
Darling, that's Snowflake. Thank you,
Snowflake.
Snowflake.
Our regular special
Curiosity.
guest here on the...
Curiosity is a very important
one of my
part of
favourite C
creativity.
words. That's
so
right. Thank you,
there
darling.
We go.
And
Curiosity
cute.
and
Oh my
cats.
God, definitely.
Cute and
Cute cat.
Cute cat. We're all about the C
question
word.
in this process of like picking someone, which is like anything creative that you do is super subjective. Like it is not, even if you are an amazing writer, like as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking about this, like, how Tim Winton has this very particular way of writing. It's very jarring, and he uses this certain language, and he goes into these stories, he tells in a very particular way, which obviously it's for many people because he's very, but it's also alienating to lots of people. So how do you pick, like, how do you marry that the person who's reading it is going to be reading it through their subjective filter? So how do you pick the person? Because, and what happens to you? Like, can you draw a line and say, I just fucking hate the way this person writes, or I just don't like this story, but can you still give them feedback, or do you then say, I don't think I'm the right person? Because it's so subjective. Something that I love that speaks to my heart, I guess that's why Tim Winton came in, like something that lives in my heart and I remember that story. I can talk about that same book with someone else who was like, I just couldn't get 10 pages into it.
Look, for me, all writing is about touching your reader, about making somebody feel something. And there's only one way that you can do that, and that is if you, as the writer, have felt something in the writing. And I can tell when I read a piece of writing whether somebody is being glib, whether somebody is being sentimental, whether somebody's being manipulative. I can feel what that person has felt when I read it. I can see the artifice of it. I can see how people are leaning on craft and not leaning into emotion, because based on how I feel when I read it. And so what you want to do is always write for the people or the person that you're writing for. I don't write for men. I honestly do never think of a man when I'm writing. I always think of a woman in her 40s or 50s who's just battling with having this big inner life, and kind of sort of, in lots of ways kind of constrained and confined in the life that she's living. And if I speak to her, and if I speak to one woman like that, I've done my job.
So this is an interesting, in a funny way, like when you're talking about a manuscript and you're saying like, okay, it's one thing to write for yourself or to write to another. In a sense, what you're almost talking about is just a marketing construct of knowing who your ideal customer is, or who you're writing for.
It's the first question.
So like when you're writing, if you're wanting to actually put your work out in the world or connect beyond doing it just for yourself, in a sense, that's an interesting marriage of creativity and marketing right from the start, that when you're sitting there writing, like, how clear is this person you're writing
Very
for?
clear.
Like, does she have a name? Can you
Absolutely.
see her? So that when you sit down to write,
you're just writing to that
Absolutely.
one person in the way that we say in marketing, like if you write your copy or you write your
But does
blog.
that come in all? Do you just draw on that when you feel like you've lost your way, or is she always there?
No, it's about I
Connecting with
yeah,
that,
I teach a course called the Author Awakening Adventure, which is also based on C's. So the one C is connection.
C is good, isn't it?
C is a very good word. It's about connection, and you've got to be in writing. You've got to be connected to yourself. You've got to be connected to your character, and you've got to be connected to your reader, your audience. And so when I teach writing, I say there are 3 key questions which sort of form like a little triangle. And the one is why? Why are you writing? And that's the question you can keep coming back to when you get stuck. Why? Because it changes, and because sometimes the first answer isn't really the answer, and because you need time to really deepen into why. Then for me, there's always got to be somebody you're writing for, and that is, you can call it in marketing terms your ideal reader, your target market, or whatever. For me, it's really just the person that you are communicating with when you're writing. And then for me, I always have, because there's always a critic involved, I always have an angel. Everybody needs an angel. Who is the angel of this of your writing? Who is sitting behind you, pushing you? In the Talmud, there's that beautiful line that says, every blade of grass has an angel that sits over it and whispers, grow. So for me, I believe that everything has an angel, and you also have, somebody that you're writing it for. And it could be, you're writing it for your, maybe the angel is like your late grandmother who loved and believed in you, and, you're writing it for your sister who, is a mess and really needs to read this book, or, somebody else out there. But I always say to people, have these 3 things in mind. Why am I writing? Who is the angel? And who, am I writing it for?
It's a great way to get through all that clutter, the anxiety. What a great way of dissecting that. I can see that really working. So it's just your inner motivation compelling you and motivating
Absolutely.
you.
And to shut out all the negativity, because really, like as I say, 90% of what I deal with writers is, and it kind of really saddens me, I think it's so strong in women, but these critical voices are, honestly, there are some people that never, ever are able to get past them. So I have an exercise where I make people draw a face with this big open mouth, and I get them to write all the things that are in their head, the worst things you could imagine people saying, the things that people have said to you, maybe, a teacher or a mother or somebody who once said something to you that just, gives you that feeling in your stomach of, who am I? Why am I doing this? Do I have it in me? And I get them to write it so we can see and hear all these things, and then I get them to take duct tape and to put it across the mouth of the critic and say, right, well, the critics had it say,
I love that.
and just shut up.
That's about externalizing, so that we park that.
Absolutely.
I've actually did a similar exercise. I've worked as a qualitative researcher for 20 years, and sometimes when you have a focus group, this was for a bank job. People hate banks. And so generally, if you've got stuff to get through, they're just going to always go back to how bad banks are and what they want to change. And so we used Edward de Bono's 6 hats. And so we're like, okay, we're going to do 6 hats today, and we're going to put the black hat on. And what we're going to do is we're going to start now with the black hat. Let's just write all the terrible things about banks.
So I don't know what the 6 hats is. Can you just give me
Edward de Bono. So there's 6
it?
hats. You've got black, which is all negative.
Critical.
Yep.
All the negative stuff. You've got yellow, which is great ideas.
Yep.
So what you want to do is, if you want to get them to that creative, positive space, you get all the negative out. And then you've got green, which is all positive.
Yep.
And you've got other ones, 6 colours.
I'm going to put that in the show notes because
Put that in the
I'm
show
going to
notes.
Google it.
Six.
It's the same concept.
Yeah.
It's about, and I also work as an art therapist, it's about externalizing the negativity. And so you make space for, you're making space for them to do the work.
You're just taking what is
It's a way of
subconscious
managing
and you're making it conscious.
It's a
You're
way of
bringing what
making-
is the shadow into the light, and
It's
you're saying,
shadow.
oh, is that the worst? Is that the worst that people are going to say? This, I mean, when you actually see what you think the worst thing is that people are going to say about your writing, so what? And it's just people's opinion. As you say, art is so subjective. What you just need to find is somebody who loves and believes in your writing. But at the same time, it's important also not to be kind of delusional.
Right.
I mean, I feel like there is a balance between
That's right.
What if someone is just crap? What they give you? What do you
It's
do?
true.
Well, I tell you what. When people
true.
come to me and they show me their writing the first time, if people haven't done any of my writing courses or they have never done any writing courses, and they show me their writing, and I look at it and I think, I don't I won't say I think it's crap. I think this needs a lot of work. And there's a lot of stuff here that is that this person doesn't understand the craft of writing, because if they did, this would not be the result. But so I never judge people's potential based on how they write when they first start, which it would be unfair, wouldn't it? Mm-mm. It would be completely unfair to do that if somebody came and they wanted to, write something. So that's why I created online courses, because I started seeing that I was making people do the same things or repeating the same things over and over again. So this way, people have to learn the craft before I'm actually even going to look at their writing. I don't want to judge people based on on somebody who comes and gives me their writing without having learned anything. I also think it's there is a humility in learning the craft of something.
So it takes work.
It takes work, and conscientiousness is one of my C's, which is like learn the bloody craft.
Totally, it takes effort. I mean, everything takes effort.
Get good at what you're doing.
Got a dichotomy about that, because so I'm trained in film and theatre, and I found when I went out as a filmmaker, because I knew so much about it, especially university level, like I think actually those things sometimes are better at TAFE or something, so I had this very C-word critical eye on everything I was doing, and I almost got to a point where I couldn't enjoy the process because I was so bogged down in what wasn't perfect or good enough about it. Then I fell into doing music, and I started learning the guitar later on. So I've basically had no guitar lessons. I've had a few singing lessons. I have no idea how I write songs. I have no idea how I have any skill. I don't even know if I do have any skill. And every now and then I actually totally feel like I cannot overthink that process, or I kill it. So like there's this line between like where do you find the line between like overthinking your creativity, overskilling, and like some kind of natural innate thing or creative flow, or overcooking or getting too much theory like
to me,
and I don't know. I don't know.
I just think some basic understanding is really, really important when you're writing, unless you are a natural storyteller. I mean, I wrote my first book before I had law degrees behind me, but I was a very, very, very big reader. So if you read, you understand story and you understand characterization. And I know a lot of people who've done no writing courses who are magnificent writers, but they are huge readers.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Even as I was speaking, I was thinking I've always been a big music fan. Like I just consume live music non-stop. So in a way that ends up being like your
that's
learning.
Your learning, And I say to people, if you're not going to learn, then just read. And what I find a little bit frustrating sometimes is people who say, I want to write a book, and I'm like, great. What books have you read? And they're like, no, I don't read. And I'm like, well, you don't read, and you want to write a book, and you want people to buy a book, but you don't buy books or anything. I find, I get a little weirded out by that.
That is kind of
it's weird. If you want to write a book, to me, it assumes that you're a reader, that you love books, that you see the value of books.
Yes.
And so, reading is the greatest way that you can learn how to write. Read great books and then work out, go away and think to yourself, what was so wonderful about it? I used to take books. I mean, Toni Morrison has just passed away.
Yeah.
I read Beloved when I was in my 20s. Beloved is the book that she won the Nobel Prize for in literature. And I read that book, and afterwards I was so affected by it, and I said, I want to write a book that is about a ghost that haunts somebody. And whenever I write any book, I have books that I would love those books to sort of be casting like the aura over what I'm doing. I want my books to be like that. So I create like a totem of books, whether it's the way the book looks or the language that's used. So Beloved was the aura over my first book, The Dream Cloth, and then The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold was the book that I sort of wanted to write a book like that.
Yeah, no.
Things Without a Name.
Yeah, books are great. I've got a lot of.
So, I think that you can draw, you can draw on other people's brilliance and creativity and sort of let it seep into you and help you in the creative process. If you simply understand what you're looking at, which is, if you read a great book and you recognize that is a great book, go away and ask yourself, why was it great? And how then? And then go back and sort of deconstruct it. How did she do that in that chapter? How did she do that in that paragraph? And what is the thing that she did that made me feel that thing? And then go, maybe write out that paragraph. Look at the way the language worked. Look at the structure of it. Look at how it was built. Because everything in writing is about layering. And so
I love that, because that's what you do when you are an artist. You go out and you draw. I mean, I spent my whole childhood I would look at the light on a plant. I'm like, oh my God, there's greens and yellows in that today, and yesterday it was blue. And so I would sit down, and when I walk, I see all these colours in the light, and I try to capture that. And, you know, Picasso was spent years at the Prado drawing the masters before he created his own.
Right.
So as an artist, we can set up and just draw. I haven't heard of it as a writer, but it makes sense.
Absolutely.
How to do it. It's exactly the same process or idea or concept.
Yeah.
Of pulling apart the visual in a literary way. I love that.
But more than that, when I teach people about voice, I ask them to bring the 3 books that have, you know, that they love the most, because your voice is hiding somewhere amongst those voices.
That's interesting. I absolutely love Cloud Atlas, which the first chapter I just took months to get through, and I'm like, I can't stand this book. It's my favourite book of all time, or top five books. And I was in this book club, and they said, just get to page 35 or whatever, and then it changes. And I'm like, what do you mean? And it is extraordinary. And I'm like, that is one of the best books ever. But that first chapter just didn't give it any... it just didn't...
It took commitment to work through it.
It did, but it didn't...
Same with Beloved.
But
Toni Morrison's Beloved.
But it was so different to what it really was, that first chapter. So it's very interesting, and it's an amazing, amazing concept. I mean, each of his chapters are quite different. They're set in different time zones and spanning different
it's a work
alternate
of genius.
universe. And it's all tied together, and I think... he writes like that though. Each chapter he is its own little world, and then he brings them together somehow across latitude and longitude and across centuries and dimensions. It's amazing.
It is. I mean, I think the other thing as well, that as writers, and I'm sure this is across all disciplines, you can learn so much about writing from, I mean, for example, movies. Like I learned everything about structure in writing from movies that I love, that are just in these amazing structures. I mean, when I teach writing, I talk about the structure of revelation. That's what you're doing in writing. It is how you are structuring revelation of character or of story. Where do you put pieces, and how does putting this piece before that piece affect the way the reader is reading it and emotionally engaging with it? And so structure, which might seem like an architectural term, is actually the structure of emotion. It's like, I ask people, what do you want the reader to feel? What is the emotional arc of the journey that you want to take people on? Right. How do you craft that? So say you wanted to shock people at the beginning. So I'll say, well, what are the elements of shock? You know, what is the emotional, what do you have to structure and create in the beginning to make readers feel shock? How do you make people feel shock? Yeah. And then structure that into the writing. And then you want people to feel sad and grief. Well, how do you structure grief? What are the components of grief? So there's loss, and there is, you know, the unknown, and there is a sense of, you know, never being able to find your life back again. And then how do you want people to finish the story? Where do you want to take people? Oh, we want to plant some hope. Well, what are the elements of that? You know, what do you have to restore in order to bring people to that point? So writing is actually something you do have to learn, and structure is something that you learn. And I have learned so much from movies, and music is so structural. Sculpture is structural. I mean, if you look at Toni Morrison, I mean, her language is so spatial and structural, and the way she puts sentences and words in one place and not another place. All of these are so many of the decisions you have to make as a writer. So, for example, are you going to have a sentence that reads, "You should eat only when you are hungry," "Eat only when you are hungry," or "When hungry, eat"?
This is Jo's book.
That's the title of one of my books. When hungry, eat. But the point about that is, you know, you are always making a decision about what impact does that sentence with so many words, or how does it feel? What's
the energy behind it?
The rhythm, the lyricism. You know, it's a short sentence. Does that belong at the beginning, at the end? You know, there are so many decisions.
So when you've got your work, like if we think about this person who's saying, how do I know if I'm going too soon or not too soon? And there are all these elements to be considering, but yet we also don't want to go into like overthinking, but we don't want to go into underthinking. I mean, I know with a lot of my clients. It's almost the revert, like this letter's sort of someone who's just chomping to put it out there.
Impatient with the final draft.
And I tend to
What's
get the
happening
opposite.
there? Why is she impatient? What's going on there?
Because, because there is, you do get to a certain point with something where you're just longing to share it with the world. Sort of, it's been
Getting
with you for long
feedback.
enough. It's like you're this pregnant with it. It's time for the thing to come out. And so you want to kind of get it out into the world. But because writing is a very particular kind of world, especially around getting agents and publishers, and it's quite soul destroying. It's quite soul destroying. It's not like you just create this book and then you're happy with it. I don't know if that's what you do with art sometimes. You just can create something and look at it and go, oh, there it is. I don't think anybody writes a book.
You can overpaint, trust
Can
me.
you?
Yeah, you can overwork something.
But
I don't know. With the inner critic,
you
C
can.
word,
You can overwork something. Sometimes
And I think
it's
a lot
ready
of
to go.
people
But what do you do
never
with it
have
once
that feeling.
once it's out there? The point with writing is that
let it go.
you've got to send it, right, to an
Yeah.
agent, you've got to send it to a competition, you've got to send it to a publisher. Never, ever, ever, ever do that unless you have had a manuscript assessor that you have paid for feedback, unless you have done a rewrite, and unless, there is a point at which I've got to say with myself, I can read something and I can know that it's ready and I can know that it's not ready.
What does that knowing feel like?
Yeah,
Like if
what's the
someone,
knowing?
if she's
like-
sitting there going, okay, tick, I've done that, I've done that, I've
But
done
she's
that.
not Joanne Federer
ready to
either.
go.
She hasn't written 11 books. But apart from
Well,
that...
well, we
No,
don't
but
know.
actually
Maybe she's
might
written,
have.
she might have written 11 books,
But I
but
think
like, what's the knowing?
experience counts for something. But I
Yes.
think the knowing each time is something that you can accumulate.
How do you
So
know?
What is the knowing?
It just is. It feels right. I've got the characters down. The story's doing what I want it to. I know what I'm. I think knowing what you're doing is an important part of the process, and or knowing what you want the story to do, and it either is working or it's not working, which is why you need feedback.
Do you get someone to read yours, or you're not?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you've got
The
manuscripts.
same person each time, or different people for different
No,
books?
and I sort of interview different, editors. I want to know what their experience is. I want to know what movies they've liked. I want to know
Yeah.
is this the right person to
Yeah.
be giving me this feedback?
How would she find someone like that? Like if she thinks she's ready but hasn't done that step, like how do you even?
Well,
Where the bloody hell do you go?
There are lots and lots and lots of manuscript assessors and editors that you can find depending on where she's based. You can Google them, and then I would I would look at what work they've done, and I would definitely interview them. I would have a conversation with them. I would want to know, do you click? There's always a sense of something clicking.
Yeah.
And with writing, like knowing when something's working, I know when it's clicking and I know when it's not. I just know it. It's like I'm not in a state of like delusion about whether something's working or not. I read it and I know that this is reading well or it's working and that there's something going on there with the characters. I'm not being superficial. I'm not trying. I've stopped the trying, and it's kind of like the thing has kind of settled, and I love my characters and I'm not sure what they're going to say next and whatever. It's not like there isn't a way in which I'm just kind of grinding towards an end. I've got a fire around it still a little bit. And so that impatience for me often is a sign that you've lost your connection to what you're doing, because you're not impatient with something that is... you don't get to 6 months with a baby inside of you and say, look, I've had enough of this.
Some people do.
Oh, my baby's out.
There's a point at which this is ready.
Yes.
And it's not like I think it's ready. I want it to be ready. It bloody better be ready. It's like, oh, it's ready. This thing is ready now.
So would you say have a break and come back to it?
Always have a break and come back to it.
And it just takes its time. It's not something you have to get done.
So there's some steps. Okay, so like now I'm going to do like the little formula thing, but of course there's a whole magical thing around it, right? The first thing I would do is that I would still, at the stage that you're at where you're like, I'm sick of it, go back to why have I written this? Why have I written this? And is the energy around this still working for me? And work that out. The second thing I would say is, have I read enough of the kinds of books that I'm trying to write? Do I know why this book is like unique and special and what it's actually trying to do in the world and who it's for and all of those factors? So all that, I don't say marketing, but more like who I'm reaching with it. Because the energy of writing is very important, the energetics of it, how you go into it, who it's for, and the energy you bring into it. Then I would definitely pay somebody to read it and give me robust feedback about what is and is not working. Then I would take that feedback and I would rework it. Then I would pay an editor to look at it and get it proofread and all of that. And then what you have to do with a piece of writing, and I know my students think I'm crazy, but I say you have to read a piece of writing, and I don't care if it's 300 pages or 400 pages, you have to read it aloud from beginning to end in one sitting. You're allowed water and wee breaks, but that's kind of it. You have to read.
Holy crap, like a whole novel.
The whole thing aloud.
Your story or someone else's?
Your book. You've got to read it aloud and hear the whole thing from beginning to end.
That's
because
a great
you'll
idea.
pick up so much from hearing it read as if you are presenting it to the world.
True.
You will hear things and that your eye has missed. And so that often happens towards the end. But in a chapter, I know the chapter's working when I've read it aloud and it goes bing. Yeah. It's like, oh, that is working. Yeah. There's not a word out of place. Right. There's nothing that's not working there. There's nothing I stumbled over. Often when you read something aloud and you sort of stumble over something, or you'll go, oh, that sentence is not necessary. You feel it. You know it. It's there. Just like it's the energy of the thing is working. And then you've got to work out, now when you've read one chapter and that's working, does the next chapter follow? So you've got to read it all in one sitting, because you'll pick up repetitions, you'll pick up inconsistencies, you'll pick up things that you don't pick up if you just read it in little bits and pieces. So the whole thing, I always say when you write a book, it's like holding a whole world inside your head. And sometimes I would be interrupted by something and it would be like I've been spinning a web and the interruption tears the whole thing down, and then I feel like I have to start again. So there's a way in which when you're writing, it's like you're holding a whole world inside your head. And when that web has been woven, there it is. You can see the whole thing, and nothing feels like it needs to be shaved off, or it's too much, or it's too little. The whole thing is just working.
It works. Brilliant. So we're going to... We could talk to you for all day.
We could.
But what we're going to do is put all the links to everything you do in the show notes and let everyone know, because I am just... I know I could talk to you... I can talk to you for hours and hours. But for everybody listening, Joanne Fedler, you are a powerhouse. You are amazing. We love you. And we will direct everyone your way. And I am... I've started my memoir, and I'm going to be coming to you. I'll be knocking on your door. I'll be knocking on your door for some advice. I want to just ask you, the last question that we're asking everybody is, what is your favourite C word?
It's very hard for me to choose, because all my courses are around C. So conviction and curiosity and conscientiousness and courage and connection and commitment.
Yes,
and
so many.
But I'll start. I'll say that my favorite word is chutzpah. Which is
that's yours.
That was hers yesterday.
That was mine yesterday.
Yeah.
Chutzpah. I like it.
It's just that one thing that I teach people, which is just about saying, I got this and I can do this, and putting yourself out there, because finally at the end of it, you can talk yourself out of stuff, but when you say to yourself, fuck it, I'm just going to do it, and
that's it.
Why not? Why not?
It's like courage on steroids.
It is courage on steroids, and it's becoming
with a
visible.
bit of spunk as well. I've got a bit of spunk behind
and
it.
It's like, yep, this is me, yep.
A bit of abandon.
Yeah.
One of my favourite words is curiosity, because I think that's what keeps me involved in everything that I do, and why I want to try a podcast and why I love talking to people. It's the conversation, the curiosity, the connection, the clarity.
Confidence too, I'm hearing in in the way you've talked about this process. Like there's something very solid in the way you're approaching that, which I know a lot of my clients almost would have written the opposite of that letter, which is just bogged down in the inner critic and all of that.
Right.
So just this inner the confidence that somehow we have to find that. Do you feel it cellularly, or do you have to fake it till you make it?
Let me say this: the way that I teach writing, I think, is very different, because I focus on what I call consciousness, and I say consciousness precedes
as well.
Consciousness is about knowing who you are.
Absolutely,
who you are, and when you know who you are, everything flows from that. Everything flows from that. The writing is sort of secondary to knowing who you are. So when you're standing in your own sense of who you are and know who you are, what flows from that can only ever just be what it is.
And then it becomes compelling. It becomes compelling from the consciousness. I mean, consciousness is really important, and we're actually we're having a whole podcast on that.
Wonderful.
And yeah, we're just going through all of our favourite C words. But thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on the Creativity Couch. Next up, we'll be chatting all about resilience and rejection with special guest, award-winning contemporary artist Susie Duro. If you have a creativity challenge you would like us to chat about, please send it to letters@thecreativitycouch.com. And also feel free to send us your favourite C word. You could win some pucker tea. And don't forget to check out the show notes for all the vital links from this episode.